Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This will be a Blu-ray review of the Kino Lorber release of the 1932 classic horror title White Zombie. This was a newer restoration. This was released, I think, back in 2013. I finally grabbed it in one of their sales. But White Zombie is an iconic horror title. It is very well known because it fell into the public domain very quickly as an independent production. It is an early Lugosi performance after Bela Lugosi's great success in Dracula, literally the year afterwards. And it is technically the first English language film or sound film to deal with zombies, even though it is the original traditional Caribbean voodoo version of zombies and not what is popularly thought of as a zombie today. It's not the greatest of films. It is very much an early talkie. It does have a lot of silent film actors who are giving performances that are unfortunately hampered by that, and it does have many of the drawbacks of an early talkie, but and it's also not the greatest script in the world, but it is very much a film you watch for the atmosphere, the visuals, and Lugosi's performance, which is iconic in and of itself. It does have some interesting usage of sound as well, in addition to little bits of a musical score, which itself was uncommon at the time. So there is enough stuff in White Zombie to recommend it, and it is essential for any classic horror fan who wants to see all the great, well-known titles of the golden age of horror. So it's important for a number of different reasons. It is a beloved title of many. It's also a film that many people really don't like at all. And since it's in the public domain, there are transfers of it everywhere. There's dozens of versions on YouTube. It is a very easy film to watch, so it's not always going to be a title that people are wanting to pay for, especially when all the various restorations are not perfect and are all based around similar imperfect sources. So on Blu-ray, you pretty much have two choices. You have this Kino version, and you have a version VCI did later based on their own restoration. Now, I don't have that VCI disc. I have read reviews of it, and I had to try and decide which one I wanted to look at because I did want to see this in HD finally. And the VCI disc did go through a second pressing. The first one had a MPEG 2 codec encoding and was not very good. They did apparently fix that on the second pressing, but the second one is kind of difficult to find. It is seemingly using the same source as the Kino version does. It is pretty much a fine-grain duplicate of the negative, which is long since gone. According to the commentary, it says it was struck in the 1960s, I believe. And the Kino version carries two transfers. It carries the restored version, which is the default option, and then on the extras, it has the quote-unquote raw version, which is literally the scan of the fine-grain print as is. Whatever you do, if you get this disc, do not watch the restored version. It is a nightmare. It has been hit with so much digital noise reduction that there is zero grain. It's way too bright. It's just a smeary, god-awful mess. It is a terrible transfer and is really appalling in the presentation, which is unfortunate because they did repair all of the scratches. They did do restoration work, but it is ruined by the additional restoration materials. It looks like one of those really terrible, well, honestly, it is one of the truly terrible DNR fiascos of Blu-ray. It is kind of getting up there on par with things like the first release of Predator or Patton, for example. Don't bother with that, whatever you do. It is really clean, though. You know, they fixed all the damage, but they ruined all that work by the DNR application. So what you will want to do is look at the raw version or the raw presentation on here. It is under the extras, so you will have to navigate to it and specifically select it when you first put in the disc. Please do keep in mind that by raw, they mean literally the film transfer element, the fine-grained print they used. It is a raw transfer. It is a bit dark in places. It does have great damage baked into it, but nothing too horrible. The worst part is there are a number of audio dropouts, but then those are already in the quote unquote restored version and pretty much all other editions. It's also got one or two spots where there is, unfortunately, they had to use some 16mm footage to splice in, and which is much closer in quality to the older pre-restoration versions, and that's how it is on all the restored versions. So I believe the the VCI version has to do the same thing. And it's not a whole lot, and if you're not looking for it, you could potentially not notice, but there is a definite quality jump in the few little sections. Really, it's like maybe 2 or 3 sections that use some 16 millimeter footage, but this is, basically working with the best available elements. So do keep in mind the raw presentation is raw, but in terms of detail and quality, this is the best I've ever seen the film presented. So even though it's got scratches and it is quite a bit dark in places and definitely doesn't look as bright and shiny as the DNRd to within an inch of its life restored, again in air quotes, restored version, the raw version is the way to go on here, and it's the only reason why you should purchase this disc. The main presentation, again, the restored version, is a joke, and just don't even bother with it. It does bring us a version of the original poster art, which looks really nice, and it does include a new audio commentary that is different from the one from the old Roan DVD that carried over to the VCI release. So when you compare this to the VCI version, the VCI seems to be sort of in the middle. It is cleaned up. It is working from, I believe, the same or similar elements, and but it doesn't seem to have the sharpness or the innate quality of this raw version. So it does seem like the raw presentation still is kind of the leader of the pack of the 2 releases and the 3 transfers they contain. So if you want to see a cleaned up version in HD of White Zombie without all the damage inherent and with some cleanup applied, but without the nightmarish DNR fiasco that this version has in its cleaned up version, you'll probably want to go for the VCI release, but you will have to track down that corrected second pressing. And as far as I know, I think the only way to do that and make sure is to look at the disc specs itself once you get it, or look at the actual manufacturing code and make sure you have the second pressing. But that being said, if you do read other reviews and you look at various screen captures online and things, it does still seem like the raw presentation is, well, I hate to say unfortunately, but since it isn't cleaned up, it is unfortunate that the raw version on this disc is still probably the best technical presentation we have for the film. And again, the audio track is pretty much the same as what's on the cleaned up version, but hasn't been hit with any noise reduction. So while it does have some natural hiss, it never overwhelms the presentation, and I quite enjoyed watching it this way. Again, it's the best I've ever seen the film look, and since the elements are not the greatest, you have to be prepared for some audio dropouts, and which, if you've ever seen this film in any of the public domain versions, or even the older Roan releases or older DVD releases, it's never looked very good. It's never going to look very good, short of getting maybe a 4K scan and getting a proper restoration that addresses everything. And in that case, it seems like there maybe has been one, because apparently the UCLA Film and Television Archive did complete a 35mm based restoration, presumably, I guess, using these same 35mm fine grain sources. This was a number of years ago, but after this and the VCI Blu-ray came out. So it's unfortunately not come to home video yet. So this UCLA restoration is apparently floating around there, out there somewhere, and it remains to be seen if and when that might come to Blu-ray. Hopefully it does. I'd be very curious to see it. I've wanted to see it ever since reading about it, and again, it was apparently completed after the Blu-ray releases, so it is presumably new work and hopefully would advance beyond even the scan that's on here on the Kino release. But until that surfaces, this still, I think, remains the best release in terms of the transfer itself, but you do have to watch it in the warts and all raw presentation, and you have to access that from the extras menu, and you have to know that it's there and what you're getting into, because otherwise you're going to be looking at the awful DNR mess that is the regular presentation. In terms of the extras, there are a couple. Again, as I mentioned before, the commentary is by Frank Thompson, which is a nice listen. And again, this is just barely over an hour in terms of the feature runtime. So it's, very comparable to the Gary Don Rhodes track that was recorded first for the Roan DVD, and then I think carried over onto the VCI release as well. So if you've heard that one or you like that one, this one, while it does cover some of the same information, it's a nice secondary track as well. It does include a piece that's been included in other releases before, but the Intimate Interviews is what the series was called. But it's a fluff interview piece with Lugosi in 1932, and you get to see him out in normal surroundings, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also great to see Lugosi, out in the Hollywood sunshine, getting an interview done, and just, in short sleeves and smoking a cigar, of course. And it's wonderful that they also transfer that in HD as well. You get the 1950s reissue trailer that prominently features Lugosi and is a fun trailer from that era. And then you get a stills gallery. So it's not a fully loaded special edition, of course, but it does give you original art. The disc label itself is rather plain. I do like what they did with the spine. If you look very closely, get that to focus, they actually put Lugosi's face with White Zombie on it on the spine, which I did think was kind of cute. But in terms of packaging, nobody has yet or probably will beat the original 1995 Roan Group LD, which I have here. This, like most of their titles, has, a real attention to detail. This was the first real major attempt to restore the film for home video. This did use 35mm fine-grained sources, and this was ported over to their DVD release, which prior to the Blu-rays was the only decent version of the film that was really available. Unfortunately, this doesn't have the commentary. That was recorded for the DVD, but the DVD is the same master and attempt at restoring the film as this LD was. But as common with Roan discs, not only did you get a cleaned up Laserdisc presentation, but the disc itself had custom labels. They included a very wonderful essay, really outdoing even Criterion at this point, because this is an entire booklet essay in the Laserdisc era. As you can see here. And then Roan also did this when possible. They actually reproduced the original advertising campaign booklet in terms of how the film was promoted, right down to actually having a faux newspaper-style page for advertising the film, and then the various types of posters you could order for your individual theater, and of course, the obligatory mailing card. So if you do want the fanciest packaging and the nicest booklet, in fact, I don't even know if the VCI has a booklet because the Kino Blu-ray doesn't, you will have to get the beautiful Roan Laserdisc, and that's why Roan LDs to this day, all these Roan collection discs still do have a nice, they still go for a nice price online because they do have a collectability factor. A lot of people try to get all the Roan discs and try to have a complete Roan shelf of all the Roan collection discs because they're all wonderfully packaged and done up like this. And this is still a pretty solid transfer. It was the first time the film was, presented halfway decently on home video. It is unfortunately picture box, but outside of that, it's about the best you could do at the time in 1995. As I said, the DVD they put out added the commentary, so you could get that if you wanted to. Again, it's unfortunate that none of the releases are perfect, but as it stands, the raw presentation on the Kino release seems to be the best available that we have now. But you do have a number of choices, and if you wanted absolutely everything, you'd have to at least have both Blu-rays and or one of the Roan disc releases as well. Now, White Zombie is never going to win any awards in terms of its artistic greatness. It does have many, many flaws. It does have, many detractors in addition to its share of fans, very devoted fans. but it's a film I enjoy coming back to, and I was really excited to finally see it in HD, and I was very pleasantly surprised at how good the raw presentation actually was, keeping in mind that it does have some frame jumps, it does have some dropouts, and some occasional missing frames. It is what it is, but for it being a early talkie independent production, it's amazing we have anything like this in terms of materials to work with. And for the atmosphere, for it being the first true film to deal with zombies, and for Lugosi's presence just right off the heels of Dracula and Murders in the Rue Morgue, plus featuring the talents of the extraordinary makeup legend Jack Pierce, and using old sets on the Universal backlot. It's got so many elements that are tried and true classic Golden Age horror that makes it a must-see for any horror fan, any Lugosi fan, and of course, essential to understand the birth of zombies in the cinematic lexicon. And that is 1932's White Zombie. So that's it for this particular Blu-ray review. It's unfortunate I can't give this a glowing review, but at least the Kino version does have that raw presentation that is actually watchable and enjoyable compared to the awful DNR primary version. So I hope anyone who gets this doesn't just use that as the default and think that's all there is, because the regular transfer on here is really unwatchable. It should have never been released like that. But at least you have the raw presentation, and again, to date, I think it's probably the best technically out there. I would like to get the VCI one just to compare, but again, you have to try and find that second corrected pressing with the proper bitrate and audio track. So as always, thank you ever so much for watching, and let's keep physical media alive, keep supporting our boutique labels, and keep your disc spinning.